All right, so that is just a snapshot, an update of what's playing out there in Venezuela. Again, that death toll continues to rise by the minute there. I want to bring in Brian McAdoo, Associate Professor of Earth and Climate Science at Duke University's Nicholas School of the Environment. Thank you for joining us, Professor McAdoo.
Thank you for having me.
You study the effects of disasters triggered by natural hazards. We heard there that the folks there in Venezuela not prepared for this sort of disaster. How could this reshape how they prepare for something like this down the road? Because they have a history of earthquakes in that area of the world.
This earthquake was a reasonably sized earthquake. It was a big earthquake for them. And certainly they weren't quite expecting it. Nobody was really expecting these things. But even if you are expecting them, it's really tough to think about how to dedicate resources and what to dedicate resources to in order to limit the damage from it. And when resources are already limited in a place like Venezuela, and you have a new government in transition right now, there's all kinds of gaps that can fall through where it makes them very, very vulnerable to even a moderate-sized earthquake. And this was a big one, so it's really quite a scary event. And we are praying for the people and their survival over the next few weeks.
And just to follow up, and this is a two-part question, from your assessment, what are the long-term and short-term? We'll start with short-term impacts of this, because this is a year's relief effort happening there, recovery there.
Exactly. I mean, there's kind of a cycle we think about with disaster management. There's initial search and recovery and the initial response phase of disaster where people have got to get the basic things you need to survive back online. And unfortunately, a lot of people from this event didn't survive. So you've got to locate and bury the injured and the deceased from this event. You've got to get basic services like water, transportation, sanitation, food services, health and medical services, electricity, all these things have got to come back on board before they can start thinking about the recovery. And the recovery phase, I think, is what you're talking about. After recovery, they have to start planning. Okay, now that we've seen what's happened in this event, we see the damage that's been done, we saw our buildings crumble, we saw a lot of our basic infrastructure fall apart. What can we do better now that we have some other investment to make sure that not if, but when the next one happens, we'll be better prepared? And that goes from everything from improving building codes to making sure that you have perhaps early warning systems in place as those continue to evolve, making sure you have other sort of soft infrastructure on board, like how is your emergency response prepared for the next disaster when it happens?
Is that possible, to your point about obviously the changes within the government and the U.S.'s involvement? Is that even possible?
It's very difficult, and it always comes down to resources. And Venezuela is blessed and cursed with amazing oil reserves there. So there's a lot of multinational companies who are trying to get into Venezuela now that they're supposedly have a more stable government. So really, how this government responds to this event is going to really tell us a lot about the stability of this government. If they can actually weather this event and more investment comes back into the country around oil infrastructure and other types of benefits they can gain off the backs of that oil infrastructure, hopefully some more investment will be coming into the country and the government. If they're a government that's less corrupt than previous governments, they can then take that money and reinvest it back into things that will prevent them, that can actually mitigate and make them a bit more resilient when the next earthquake happens.
Can you give us an idea of the relief efforts that are happening right there on the ground? Because from what you're reading and what you're seeing, because from what I read and see, you hear Venezuelans there helping. You also hear the U.S. government helping, and then you also hear other sort of groups and nonprofits coming in to help. But from your assessment, what are you hearing? What are you seeing?
I was just reading that the United Nations has already sent, I think there's 10 or so different countries have sent search and rescue teams, including the United States, including India and places like this, that are there to support the search and rescue efforts. Right now, it's very difficult because you need to clear a lot of debris, and where search and rescue efforts can help, they don't bring backhoes with them. They don't bring the heavy machinery it takes to remove a lot of this debris. So it's going to take years for them to actually get all this debris removed and make sure they start rebuilding in a way that makes them more resilient when the next one happens. Right now, we're kind of coming to the end of the window, unfortunately, when survivors can still make it after this long after the earthquake. So once that window closes, then they can start coming with heavy equipment and start removing debris so they can rebuild. But the search and rescue efforts are going to be limited by on what kind of resources and capacity they have on the ground to actually accept the different kinds of aid that will be coming to the country. A lot of aid is going to be great, but if they don't have the actual backhoes and heavy machinery in place to move stuff, all the money in the world's not going to help them rebuild. So these are the challenges that Venezuela is facing, and it's going to be an uphill battle for them for at least the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's going to take a long time, but can you walk us through what at least what the next days, weeks look like? And again, I know this is a long haul, but days, weeks, what does that look like?
Yeah, the next days, right now, I imagine that the search and rescue teams are still very weary, looking for survivors. There haven't been many survivors because of the nature of construction in Venezuela. After they start realizing that, okay, that's done, they've got to get back the basic infrastructure. They've got to focus on making sure that they have in place the health care to take care of the injured. There's going to be a lot of people that will be injured from this event. Make sure that they're even the day-to-day operations of hospitals and health clinics get back up on board. I've heard that the power grid is coming back on board in places up to 75% in some of the heavily affected areas, which is a good sign. Once people have electricity, they can start going back to their normal lives, getting businesses going again, and that sort of thing. I haven't heard much about food security and how water systems are responding, but I imagine those are the kind of basics you need to get back online so that people can actually survive through the next couple of weeks, so that when they do start thinking about rebuilding, they have the energy, both in terms of electricity and in terms of food and water, to actually complete the huge reconstruction process they have ahead of themselves.
One last question before I get you out of here. You've been so gracious with your time, Professor McAdoo. What information is still missing for us to fully assess the scale of this disaster?
Yeah, communications after an earthquake are always extremely difficult. We get spotty information. We get a lot of different videos coming from the same places, especially in big cities where there's a lot of people focused. I think the big challenge we're going to face now is actually getting out to more rural areas and making an assessment of how damage is out there. Now, in some ways, there's kind of a paradox in place where the cities are the ones that tend to have bigger high-rise buildings that may not be very well constructed, so they can actually cause a lot of damage. Where if you're very, very poor and live in a smaller domicile, the smaller house out in the countryside, it maybe not cause as much damage if and when it collapses. So, we're not really sure of what happened in the rural area, but there's a lot of people that live in rural areas in Venezuela. They are going to be incredibly vulnerable because they don't have access to a lot of the resources they have in the big cities. So finding out what those people need out in the further areas away from Caracas and the bigger cities are going to be the big challenges I see in the future for those people.
Professor Brian McAdoo, Associate Professor of Earth and Climate Science at Duke University's Nicholas School of the Environment. Thank you so much for joining us and for this breakdown. This is really helpful.
Thank you for having me. Hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. And on that note, let's head to break. We'll be back here in just 2 minutes here on Live Impact News on the